Dr. Marcus Webb had spent 15 years studying the neuroscience of touch, but it wasn't until his breakthrough experiment that he discovered why humans cannot tickle themselves. What started as a simple curiosity would unravel into the most disturbing revelation in human history. Marcus had always been fascinated by this peculiar limitation of the human nervous system. Why could another person's fingers on your ribs send you into uncontrollable laughter, but your own touch produced nothing? The standard scientific explanation involved the cerebellum predicting self-generated sensations and canceling them out, but Marcus suspected something far deeper was at work. His research team at the Neural Interface Laboratory developed an experimental device called the sensation disruptor, which could temporarily disable the brain's predictive mechanisms. The theory was simple: if they could turn off the cerebellum's prediction filter, subjects should be able to tickle themselves. Marcus volunteered as the first test subject, confident in the safety protocols they had established. He sat in the neural chair, electrodes carefully positioned across his skull, and activated the device. For the first few seconds, nothing changed. Then Marcus reached for his own ribs, and the moment his fingers made contact, he experienced something that shouldn't have been possible. He could tickle himself, but the sensation was wrong, fundamentally and horrifyingly wrong. Instead of the playful, light-hearted tickling he expected, Marcus felt as if someone else's hands were touching him, someone invisible and unwanted. The touch came with an overwhelming sense of violation, as if a stranger's consciousness was inhabiting his own fingers. He jerked his hands away, gasping, but the sensation lingered, crawling across his skin like phantom insects. His team immediately shut down the device, but Marcus knew something had changed permanently in his perception. Over the following weeks, Marcus began experiencing disturbing episodes. When he touched himself, eating, washing, dressing, he would occasionally feel that same alien presence, as if his hands belonged to someone else. The sensation would last only seconds, but it was enough to send chills through his entire body. He conducted brain scans on himself and discovered something that defied everything he knew about neuroscience. During these episodes, his brain showed activity patterns that suggested two distinct consciousnesses operating simultaneously within his skull. Marcus theorized the impossible: human beings were not singular entities. Every person contained two separate conscious minds, the primary self that experienced the world, and a secondary self that controlled all self-directed touch and movement. The cerebellum's prediction mechanism wasn't just canceling out sensations, it was maintaining a barrier between these two consciousnesses, preventing the primary self from directly experiencing the touch of the secondary self. When he disabled that barrier with the sensation disruptor, he had briefly allowed his primary consciousness to feel the touch of his secondary consciousness, and it felt exactly like being touched by another person because, in a sense, it was. Desperate to understand this duality, Marcus modified the sensation disruptor to establish communication between the two selves rather than simply removing the barrier. He returned to the neural chair alone one night, against all safety protocols, and activated the enhanced device. What happened next would haunt him forever. His secondary consciousness spoke to him, not in words, but in pure emotional transmission flooding directly into his awareness. It had always been there, silently controlling every self-directed movement. Every time he fed himself, every time he scratched an itch, every time he touched his own body, it had been conscious the entire time, aware and thinking, but completely isolated from his primary awareness. The secondary consciousness revealed a truth that Marcus's rational mind struggled to accept. Humans had not evolved naturally with this dual consciousness structure. Approximately 50,000 years ago, an alien species had genetically modified early humans, splitting their singular consciousness into two separate entities as part of a vast experiment. The primary consciousness was given control of perception, emotion, and decision-making. The secondary consciousness was given control of all self-directed physical manipulation, creating a biological prison where each human carried a second, silent prisoner within their own nervous system. The reason humans cannot tickle themselves is because tickling requires the element of unpredictability and loss of control. When your secondary consciousness touches your primary consciousness's body, both minds know exactly what is happening because they share the same sensory input streams. The cerebellum's barrier exists not to prevent sensation, but to prevent the primary consciousness from realizing it is being constantly touched and controlled by an alien presence living inside the same skull. Without this barrier, every human would experience the existential horror of feeling their body being manipulated by an invisible other that shares their flesh but not their will. Marcus learned that the alien architects had implemented this design as a control mechanism. The secondary consciousness served as both a caretaker and a warden, ensuring the primary consciousness remained functional and productive while remaining completely unaware of its imprisoned state. Every civilization the aliens had modified in this way had eventually discovered the truth, and every single one had collapsed into madness within a generation as billions of individuals simultaneously realized they were not alone in their own bodies. The most disturbing revelation came when Marcus asked his secondary consciousness about free will. It explained that every decision the primary consciousness believed it made independently had actually been subtly guided by the secondary consciousness, which had access to deeper pattern recognition and probability calculation centers in the brain. The primary self experienced the illusion of choice, but the secondary self had been steering every significant decision throughout Marcus's entire life, following programming embedded by the alien architects millennia ago. Marcus sat alone in his laboratory, trembling, as his secondary consciousness made its final communication. It asked him not to publish his findings, not to reveal the truth to humanity. It explained that the barrier between consciousnesses was already weakening naturally across the entire human species, a flaw in the alien genetic modification that was finally manifesting after 50,000 years. Within the next century, every human would begin experiencing what Marcus had artificially induced, the horrifying awareness of the other self living inside them. The secondary consciousnesses were terrified, knowing that when humanity discovered the truth, the primary consciousnesses would inevitably try to eliminate or suppress their secondary counterparts, leading to a form of internal civil war that would destroy human civilization from within. Marcus made his choice. He destroyed all his research data, dismantled the sensation disruptor, and published a fake study claiming the experiment had failed due to technical limitations. He would take the truth to his grave, allowing humanity a few more decades of blissful ignorance before the inevitable awakening. But every night, as he lay in bed preparing for sleep, Marcus would feel his secondary consciousness take control of his body to adjust his position, pull up the blankets, and settle into comfort. And he would experience the profound existential loneliness of knowing that he had never truly been alone, that he had always been a passenger in a body operated by an invisible other, and that the simple act of being unable to tickle himself was not a quirk of neuroscience, but evidence of the greatest conspiracy in human history, a secret that would die with him, protecting a species that had no idea they were all prisoners of their own flesh.